Welcome back to Capital for After Hours. We have a little bit longer time to kick around some of the issues. I noted in Politico magazine that that in Albany, sexual harassment case, 6 years, 1,000 complaints across all of New York State government, $66.4 million. George Colli did a piece recently on WTNH, sexual harassment complaints in Hartford over 18 years. George, how many? Thousands, right?
Two complaints. Not 2,000, not 200. Two. With none since 2002.
They're very well behaved in Hartford, George.
Well, you know, it's something that I think is happening across the country. There's also a New York Magazine article that came out today that's saying that there's sexual harassment scandals taking place in over a dozen state legislatures right now. So I think we saw this start off in Hollywood. We saw it talked about in Washington, D.C., and now I think you're seeing journalists across the country looking at the state governments and trying to find out exactly how these situations have been handled. You know, we did this story, we started looking at it, we first talked about it on After Hours back in November here, talking about the process that staffers were telling me they would have to go through if they ever want to make an official complaint, which is, it's not as easy as just going up to the Office of Legislative Management, which is the HR office for the Capitol, and filing a complaint if they have an issue. It's that they would need to go to their chief of staff, and then a late leadership's chief of staff, and then a designated person of the opposite gender. And I mean, there's 4 or 5 steps along the way that any young employee or old employee you would have to go through. And I think we're finding that process is, you know, there may be something wrong with it.
They were shocked that their process existed. They're going to do something about it, right, George? They're going to look into it.
Well, listen, Roy worked in the legislature. I worked in Albany at the Ways and Means. So a handful of those people that I worked with aren't even in office anymore. They had to leave because of a lot of these allegations. So putting aside the awfulness of this, okay, so you're dealing in a situation which is problematic, no matter what system you put in. I'm not saying we shouldn't be aggressive. When you go to work in the legislature, no matter what station, what rank, you've got to take a course in sexual harassment, which I took with our old friend Marty Dunleavy. And I found it to be actually pretty good, pretty deep, pretty thorough. And in terms, I was going to be skeptical about it. But anytime you're dealing with young people who make very little money, who are starting their careers out, or who are in a position where they have literally, they're in the political side, you're an at-will employee. You can go like that. There's no process of, you know, I gotta file a grievance or whatever, and all that. It's a you know, you can be gone in a day. So that overhangs everything, and to go through this process, you're making a decision in pretty young life, or even not young life, to say I'm going to be all done in this business after whatever happens, even if it goes to the other side and that supervisor or elected official is taken down. So
and how does that change? I mean, we heard the governor talk about sexual harassment in the workplace.
Liz says that was condescending.
And well, there were, you know, you had a lot of lawmakers wearing pink dresses, pink ribbons. Every single person, I was on the floor when he made that speech, and every person in that room was clapping, and they were seeing if the camera was on them in the corner of their eyes. But here's the issue that I have. We worked on this starting in November. We didn't want to play gotcha on this story. I spoke face-to-face with the caucus staffs about wanting to do the interviews, about wanting to talk to leadership together, about wanting to try to not politicize this issue. So the day, as we're trying to confirm the time for our interview on a Thursday, which was going to be taking place on Friday with all caucus leaders, no one calls us back. Instead, the set of Democrats in this situation walked outside of their caucus room, went straight to the print reporters, and called for a total review of policies and procedures on sexual harassment in the Capitol and legislative hearings.
See the impact you're having?
Well, here's the problem. They still haven't answered the questions. But you know what? And which kind of made it really come across, I felt, as somebody who had been working on this for a few months, pretty phony, when everybody was clapping as hard as they possibly could. Going through that process.
You say people clapping at a political event are phony people?
Well, no, I'm thinking that the fact that they would not answer, not one person that was up on their feet. Let me just finish.
Can I just ask you one question?
Not one person who was standing and clapping and hooting and hollering for that statement from all sides of all 4 caucuses, not one of them would sit in front of us and answer questions.
Matt Ritter had a great answer the question, though.
So I get that.
Ritter did afterwards.
I get that, too. In that time period is ridiculous. One would assume that.
Which is what Matt Ritter said. Right. I think he gave the answer.
Well, were you able to ascertain what the disposition of those 2 cases was?
Yes, I was able to read them, and we read through them, and I think this wasn't something that we were looking to name drop. We weren't looking to, you know, and there are some people who are in that list who are still working in state government, that are still working in the caucuses. And so, you know, we weren't looking to start name-dropping accusations. We wanted to look at really, in many ways, we wanted to see if the policy and the process worked.
Right.
And so they did call for that review.
But
I think they need to be honest with themselves, and they need to start.
But here's the thing, a lot of this, also, listen, a lot of this, you have new leadership on both. No.
I know, yeah. Over the women.
I'm not.
It's part of the issue.
Listen, the Republican leaders, as far as I know, as well as the Democratic leaders, I think are earnest in the sense of, look, we got to look at this stuff. You should always review it as a matter of course. All your policies, especially dealing with personnel, I think that's a given. I think a lot of this also is the fact that, you know, I can tell you, I've been up there since in one form or another since 1986, and believe me, it's come a long way from Sodom and Gomorrah from 1986 to now. In the sense of,
why don't we let the women chime in? Like,
let the women get in.
Let the women get in here. I was just going to say, I think there has to be a cultural change also. It's not just a problem at the legislature. I mean, you see it's a problem everywhere. So how do we create a culture where women actually feel comfortable talking to somebody about what happened and don't feel like there's going to be a repercussion? And there's a lot of embarrassment that goes around being sexually harassed and, you know, having an unfair workplace and feeling like maybe you're not going to be backed up by people. So how do we change that culture, both at the legislature? I mean, it just can't be a simple policy, because if people don't feel comfortable enough to explore that policy, nothing's ever going to change. So you can't just pay FaceTime to it. It has to be a real cultural change that women can feel supported in their workplace to actually make these changes.
And I think some of what you've been hearing are supporting the victims and other people noticing what's happening, right? If this is a continued, ongoing thing, that the people that are around the victim of the harassment should be the ones that are helping to report this situation and to allow the victim to confide. And look, I mean, politics, and I'm sure you've gone through this, there's no shortage of harassing and things like that. And it's something that does need to change from a cultural perspective. I think some of this has been adjudicated in the court of public opinion. I mean, you look at what happened with Ernie Hewitt, and this is not a partisan issue, I just say that, but what Ernie Hewitt did, you know, live on CTN, you know, sort of exposed a deeper issue. Just
wouldn't
in the
have lasted
legislature.
10 seconds if that happened today.
No,
I mean, that's how much things have changed since then.
And so that's the point, right? And again, this is not a partisan thing. I'm just saying,
which is why your reporting is so important.
Thank God he did that,
right.
and he was that snarky on camera so that somebody could deal with it.
In the remaining time we have, George, good news for the crumbling foundations, folks. Congressman,
kind of been a back and forth.
Congressman Larson, Congressman Courtney, and Congressman Neal from Massachusetts, right?
Yes, a ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, Richard Neal. We had reported around Thanksgiving, there was an announcement that anybody who got their foundation fixed, paid out-of-pocket costs to get it fixed, which would go into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, would be able to write it off on their federal taxes as a property casualty loss deduction. Well, about 3 weeks later, the tax bill passed and it eliminated property casualty loss tax deductions. So what John Larson and Joe Courtney announced yesterday, along with Richard Neal, is that they are going to be allowed to have an extension, so anybody who gets that foundation fixed in the next 3 years can get that write-off. So this isn't the total solution here, but you have at this point now the federal government, anybody from the last 3 years or anyone that gets it done in the next 3 years will now be able to write that off, and that could be tens of thousands of dollars.
But can I ask you a question? Didn't you, when you were here a few weeks ago talking about this, didn't you say that this was something that would continue to be a problem and roll out for the next 10 to 15 years?
Yes.
So what about those people?
Well, I think that's going to be, that's why this is not the end of this story. We're going to be, I think, the rest of our lives, in many ways, going to be hearing about this story.
And you'll be on your gravestone.
And it's George Colli.
This cement will not crumble. Will not crumble. Right.
Replacing the foundation.
George Colli.
And I just want to say this, too, because I have been talking to a lot of the employees and the staffers at the Capitol about this issue. And they should know that we're going to stay on this. That for every one of those staffers, the grunts that make
back to the harassment.
This is harassment, as well as the same promise I made to the Crumbling Foundation's homeowners, and to the lawmakers that thought maybe this was going to be a one and done story. This isn't. We're going to stay on this. We're going to listen to their stories. If they want to talk on television, we'll hear them. The governor said that. You need to listen to them, and we're going to. And so for anybody up there, let them know that we are going to stay on this, and this isn't just going to be covering a hearing when it happens.
Here's George Colli. He's back, baby.
Time to run for governor.
There you go.
There we go.
Guys, see you next week.